between being more interested in the mechanics of diplomacy than in the creation of its policy. I was struck by a note that President Obama made in speaking at the National Defense University in March of 2009. And he said, "We're threatened as a country by the spread of the world's deadliest weapons, by emerging cyber threats, by our dependence on foreign oil, economic crisis, poverty, disease, the persistence of conflict and genocide in the 21st century, all challenge our diplomacy, our international alliances, our partnerships, and our institutions." Now, I will say it's very important to note that American diplomacy had, of course, been adjusting to the challenges I've offered to you. For years, with American leadership and support, NATO was expanded and transformed both before and after 9/11 to better meet the challenges of the 21st century. Plan Colombia, begun under President Clinton, continued very forcefully under President Bush, continued by President Obama, promoted a broad picture of human security, focusing simultaneously on defeating narcoterrorism, promoting economic development, and enhancing human rights in Colombia. The Millennium Challenge Account, created in 2004, is, I believe, one of the most interesting new ways and innovative new ways to think about giving foreign assistance to countries, because it addresses development assistance by supporting sustainable economic growth, by investing in countries that rule justly, invest in their people, and promote economic freedom. And the Proliferation Security Initiative, a partnership of more than 90 countries using their own laws and their own resources, committed to stopping shipments of weapons of mass destruction on the sea and in the air and on land. And I will tell you that the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq have produced new structures and experiences for State Department people, especially the provincial reconstruction teams, which have required close contact at younger ages between our diplomats and our military officers than has been the case since Vietnam. And reform of America's diplomatic infrastructure had begun as well in the late 1990s. Secretary Albright supported major changes in the way the department recruited and retained its personnel. Secretary Powell launched the Diplomatic Readiness Initiative, hiring almost 1,200 new State Department employees. Secretary Rice continued to highlight the need for diplomatic transformation, and especially in the area of personnel. And Secretary Clinton has said that her objective is to increase the size of the department by 25% over 4 years. So I think that there's a tension. There's a tension between American diplomacy that is uniquely American and American diplomacy that is part of this larger international diplomatic culture. But I think there's cause for optimism for a more successful management of it. A State Department pursuing a definition of America's interests, international interests, national interests, human security interests, which follow what Walter Russell Mead calls the need to focus on economics, the problems of international order building, and the relationship of democracy to foreign policy, will be a stronger institution, better connected to the American public, and better able to lead the international diplomatic culture in a uniquely American manner. And of course, there can be no successful American diplomacy without the support of a president who sees diplomacy as a key tool of American strength. But very important as well is that the State Department cannot see a president who says, yes, this is a national security tool of the United States of America, as the end or the victorious end of some kind of campaign for attention. But you'll have to watch this, because the international culture of diplomacy is very strong. And some people will argue that it is not the diplomat's job to close the gap that Kissinger identified. And if you look at the reaction to Secretary Rice's speeches on transformational diplomacy in 2006 and 2008, not all of them were positive. And there are, of course, events in the world and in our own nation which make this a bigger challenge. Americans are impatient people, but successful diplomacy often is based on long-term campaigns to promote America's interests. Although there is now a broad consensus on the need to increase the civilian capacity of our country, the economic crisis may make it impossible to fund that. It may be that this will move down the national agenda. There will always be a strain in American thinking which equates diplomacy with weakness. And events and the divergent interests of others can complicate rather than simplify the most earnest commitment to diplomacy and engagement. And maintaining a strong defense and demonstrating the willingness to use force are essential to diplomacy as well, because it has to be said out loud that diplomacy is not the answer to every question. When I look out on the world today, it seems to me that taking these cautions in mind, there are a number of possibilities for an American diplomacy of the 21st century. For example, although there is surely still work to be done to defeat extremists that will require the use of force, America can leverage the simultaneity of the challenges to create opportunities rather than the constraints, and pursue again what Philip Bobbitt has called a strategy of preclusion. Not preemption, but preclusion. And recognizing that it is with our friends and with our allies and with our thinking in new ways that there are a range of policies and institutions that can be harnessed to manage global instability, which leads to extremism and threatens America's well-being and security. Second, the United States has in its capacity the ability to do more in the area of non-proliferation. And there will need to be a 21st century non-proliferation diplomacy. And it would include policies in the area that have to do with the Non-Proliferation Treaty, renewing the START Treaty, seeking a broader participation in missile defenses. And of course, today's news and yesterday's news about missile defenses opens this question widely. What to do? Who should participate? How to make missile defense both effective and with the largest number of countries possible. And crucial, of course, will be meeting the requirements that Graham Allison said, again, to make sure that these weapons of mass destruction don't get into the hands of terrorists. And third, think about how American diplomacy can galvanize this world conversation about sustainability on Earth. It will take substantial diplomatic creativity to address climate change beyond Kyoto, perhaps basing an effort not on a formal treaty, but on transparent national obligations judged systematically by others in the international system. And this comes to us as a country because there's the meeting in Copenhagen at the end of the year that will require this creative environmental diplomacy. There are, of course, many other challenges and opportunities in the world today. I'm glad to talk about any of them in the question period. But I believe that I want to leave you with this message, that the enhancement of diplomacy and a public defense of engagement as a national security tool will make our country stronger and not weaker. And that a successful American diplomacy for the 21st century will be based on values and integration, alliances, coalition, and backed as it must be by the greatest military force ever assembled. And America will act alone if we must. But surely we can use our unique position of strength to set an example for this world and encourage others to join us as we pursue these great objectives. And to me, this brings it right back to the question of why the World Affairs Councils of America. Because this issue of how America is engaged in the world and how we participate in this larger conversation is for all of you to help define. And this network, this unique group of 500,000 people interested in inspiring and educating and engaging as America is engaged in world affairs, is something unique and something I thank you for participating in, and something I hope will, as I say, be stronger a year and 2 years and 3 years from now than it even is today. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I'd be very glad to take any questions or comments anybody might have.